Scott, I was going to say busy day today, not in the sense that we heard all kinds of promises from all the various leaders on the trail. Can you just try to contextualize this whole issue with Mark Carney and Donald Trump and what was said in that first meeting and whether this poses any kind of real threat as far as Carney's concerned?
You know, I kind of don't think so. I don't think he had a great scrum. And I know, his opponents are running off now and saying, "Oh my God, he's hiding stuff." I didn't really read it that way. It sounds like Trump started out talking about 51st state, and then sort of said, "Listen, yeah, okay, I respect Canadian sovereignty and so forth." So, I think it's, I think it's all a wash. So it could kind of go one of three ways. One, it doesn't matter, which is probably the way that it ends up going. Two, it harms Carney in that, it feeds at the seed of, can you count on what he says? Although I don't really think, other than conservative talking points, that's really actually dug its way into people's heads. Like, I don't actually think that's something that people associate with him. So we'll have to see about that. And then, third, it could still help Carney in the sense that Donald Trump is back in the talk here. He's back in the picture frame. And what has happened throughout this campaign, when Carney has been talking about Trump, when he's been talking about trade and tariffs, when the issue has been how are we going to protect ourselves against the economic threat of a trade war with the United States, all that works to Carney's advantage because it highlights the issue of leadership, it highlights economic management, it highlights experience and competence. So in a weird way, even if it was a miserable scrum and, you got a bunch of people criticizing him, the issue set is the issue set the Liberals would like people to be talking about as they go to vote on Monday.
I'm not going to ask you to think what Donald Trump, has going through his head, but this idea of him saying this at this time, some people will suggest maybe he is in some way trying to influence this election. And if he was, would it be to have Mark Carney become prime minister or to become Pierre Poilievre become prime minister?
I just think that whole thing is a mugs game. Like, as if Donald Trump gives a rat's, about what the outcome of our campaign is. I mean, this is a guy who sicked the mob on his own vice president. I don't think he cares about anything other than Donald J. Trump. So I know people are kind of going, well, if he brought this up, that means that he knows the 51st state rallies the country toward Carney. Therefore, he wants Carney. Therefore, Carney must actually be the weaker of the two options to negotiate with Trump. Aha, I see. So therefore, voting for Carney is a mistake because that's what Trump wants, even though that's not what he said. I mean, come on, man. Just pick the person you want to be prime minister. Go from there. If you try to think about what goes through Donald Trump's head, you will end up in a straitjacket because that's a hall of mirrors and howling wolves.
Excellent. All right, let me ask you the other story today that I thought was interesting. We know that the parties are campaigning in areas they think they can win. I know that the Liberals have done or tried to do a pretty good job of not talking about getting a majority, with the exception of Melanie Joly, who kind of went at it at a rally in Laval the other night. But there's a story today, Scott, that possibly Pierre Poilievre is in danger of losing his own seat. How accurate is that? What are you seeing on that?
What's funny about this is I had conservatives saying this to me about a week ago. So I'd sort of started to hear this kind of drumbeat of, and at that point, the Liberals, the polls look a little different now. The Liberals are ahead 7, 8, 9 points in Ontario. A week ago, they were ahead like 15 points. So that's a different context. People were saying, at this kind of number, Poilievre may not win his riding. And I was kind of like, really? Well, I hadn't actually thought explicitly about that. So I think this is kind of that buzz catching up with media. It's finally made its way into media and to being reported. And I do think that there's sufficient anxiety that they almost certainly did call in volunteers. I mean, because that's a reportable item in the story. So I do think that's happened. I don't think that means he's going to lose his riding necessarily, but it means that they don't want to take any chances. And once you start calling and saying, we want to reassign people from ridings A, B, and C toward the leader's riding, you're going to get a story. That people are going to spill their beer, trying to rush to tell somebody else, oh my God, they must be worried about the leader's riding. So we'll see. I mean, with these numbers, there could be unpredictable results in Ontario. There really could be. But the NDP is so low. You could see the Conservatives lose a ton of ridings with 40% of the vote, which is bananas. Yeah. But that could happen if the Liberals have 43, right?
Where does this factor in historically? Because you keep hearing that a lot, right? Given the fact that the NDP and the Bloc are barely registering anything at all, and that you imagine you could get 40% of the vote, as you just outlined, and end up, of course, still losing and looking at a majority government by your opposition. When has that happened in Canada ever before?
Yeah, the NDP in its current form been around for 64, 65 years, and I don't know there have been many elections. 25 years ago, the NDP were, low in the polls, so they were at like 10%. So it's not like they haven't had a low ebb before. But to have it all concentrated, remember when that happened 25 years ago, you had the Reform Party. So there were votes being siphoned in different directions, but to move to this like mano a mano, two-party square-off, I don't think we've had that in 60, 70 years.
Pretty amazing. And today, by the way, we have a new Nanos poll that has I think the gap between the Conservatives and the Liberals, the closest it's been, I think maybe since the get-go, 42.9% for the Libs, 39.3%. We're almost within the margin of error. So parties look at this, Scott, they have internal polling, of course, as well. What do you change if you're looking at these numbers and the distance between the two parties getting smaller as we get closer and closer to Election Day?
Well, if you're the Liberals, you want to get back to what's worked. So you want to get back to where we talked about earlier. You want to get back to Trump and making a leadership choice. You want to remind people that was the driving dynamic that took the Liberals off the mat and brought them back to this point. If you're the Conservatives, you're running around and you're saying to people, listen, we're in the game. Don't believe the buzz. Don't act defeated. We got 4 days to go, and Election Day is the whole game. So show up. But what they really need to do as a campaign, they need to close the gap in Ontario. They need the Bloc to rally in Quebec in order to cut into some of the seat gains that the Liberals could have. But the whole game for the Conservatives, they've got to cut into the lead in Ontario. Even with that 3-4 point lead that you're talking about nationally, they're still down 7, 8, 9% in the province of Ontario. They will lose. They will lose the election if that finishes this way. So what they need to do is turn that 8-9 point gap into a dead heat. If they can do that by Election Day, then this thing is a Yahtzee. But if they're still losing by 7, 8, 9, 10% in the province of Ontario, they're going to lose a bucket full of ridings all around the 905, what we call the Golden Horseshoe, which goes through Hamilton down into the Niagara region. And they'll win, and they'll lose those ridings with really great numbers for a Conservative Party. They'll lose them with 40%, but they will lose still.
And it's just as a last question, that if you're the NDP looking at these numbers and looking at that, that 3%, that margin of error, do you double down in convincing your potential voters not to vote Conservative? That's what they don't want to see?
Yeah, see, that's what really scares the NDP. They see this talk of, these polls are looking close, and they're like, oh no, all of our voters are going to say, well, we got to vote Liberal to stop Poilievre, to stop Trump. And so I really think if I were running the NDP campaign, I would turn it into donate blood. I would literally go to the microphone and have the leader say, the party could fall below official party status. We could be wiped off the map. The NDP play an important function. Don't let that happen. If you've ever voted NDP, if you live in a riding that's represented by a New Democrat, vote NDP. And I call it donate blood because I think it's literally an emotional last chance appeal. You're basically saying, I'm on the gurney, right? I'm dropping blood. I'm losing rapidly. We need your help. Are you B negative? Great. Donate, please. Are you NDP? Donate your vote. I think they literally almost have to make that last chance appeal because the fact is that's the situation they're in.
Scott Reid, Scott, as always, appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Have a great night.
You too.